As idols and artists, BTS have often discussed the feeling of having a dual identity. This, of course, can be seen in how they are on stage versus off stage, but even more obviously, it's present in something as simple as their stage names. However, one member of the group has the unique distinction of not only having two identities, but actually having three. I'm talking, of course, about Suga, real name Min Yoongi, and his alternate persona, Agust D. Although Agust D is meant to be a different side of Min Yoongi the rapper, it's not as if this persona is completely separate from him and what he values. In fact, the very name Agust D is like an amalgamation of all his identities, as when read backwards, it reads as DT Suga, the DT representing Suga's hometown in Daegu. Rather than being a complete departure from Suga's identity, therefore, Agust D is more an extension of his life, his artistic vision, and his career, allowing him to tell stories he might otherwise not be able to tell. Musically, this led to Suga creating what became known as the Agust D Trilogy, composed of 2 mixtapes and a solo album, 2016's self-named Agust D, 2020's D2, and the 2023 album D-Day. While it's true that these albums are still Suga's own personal story, despite the different name, the trilogy also tends to treat Agust D as if he were an ever-evolving, multifaceted character, hinting that there may even be more than one of him. Through this tactic, the music videos of the trilogy explore Suga's journey and musical style, while also allowing Agust D as a character to keep changing as part of the ongoing storyline. In both his work as a member of BTS and as Agust D, Suga unflinchingly discusses elements of society, culture, and his own life struggles, both before and after he began rising to fame as a member of BTS, often in ways that are raw, vulnerable, and deeply impactful. So today, in honor of Suga's military discharge in June 2025, I'd like to dive deep into the world of Agust D, both as a concept and as a character, analyzing the songs, stories, and evolution we can see throughout this body of work. I'll theorize about what the music videos of the trilogy are trying to say, both about the character and more broadly, as well as unpack the emotional songs that have become the hallmark of Suga's solo work. Together, we'll explore what lessons these songs can teach us about Suga, ourselves, and the world around us. So, I hope you'll join me today as I explore the world of Suga and his alter ego, Agust D. The Agust D Trilogy. Before I discuss the music videos of the Agust D Trilogy and how they portray him as a character, I want to talk about the albums themselves, beginning with the first appearance of Agust D in the 2016 mixtape of the same name. The first Agust D, also nicknamed D1 by Suga himself, is an incredibly raw and intense exploration of Suga's triumphs, anxieties, and struggles, describing his past and detailing how he came to his then current place in life. It's full of songs that spit in the face of the haters and skeptics who doubted that he would ever succeed, while also acknowledging that the breadth of his success is a surprise even to himself. Through songs like the titular Agust D or Give It To Me, he affirms his belief that his success is thanks to his propensity to work harder than the people who criticize him, and that he will continue to chase after more artistic power, success, and fame. After these powerful songs, however, are skits and songs that heavily feature conversational rap, turning the mixtape from being just a flex against haters and into an examination of what his victories have cost. In 14:05:03 at dawn, for instance, he mentions how he began developing social phobias around the same time that he was succeeding as a trainee, and how this led to him becoming isolated from his family and friends as he continued to wall up his emotions. This all culminates in the haunting and painful honesty of The Last, a track in which Suga unflinchingly discusses his suffering with anxiety and depression, a far cry from the confident swagger of earlier tracks. In both The Last and in the mixtape's next track, Tony Montana, he continues to unpack the effects fame and success have had on his life, viewing these things as monsters that want him to offer more and more to them. In Tony Montana, he compares himself to the main character of the film Scarface, a refugee who went from having nothing to having everything before his violent fall from grace. In portraying the dark side of the typical rags to riches dream, Suga acknowledges that success and happiness are not the same thing, and resolves to not chase success at the expense of others, hopefully avoiding the downfall that befell the song's namesake. Finally, in the album's final track, So Far Away, he returns to the beginning of his journey. The repeated word of this track is dream, and within the song's lyrics, he seems to be musing that he has gone much farther away from his original dream than he ever imagined. This leads to him wishing that he could fly away or disappear to avoid everything that's come afterwards. However, there are several affirmations likewise bound up in the lyrics. I think these lyrics both encourage us to dream because we will one day succeed, and caution us to remember that sometimes dreams fade away and we are left with reality, leading to a sort of melancholy sweetness. The first Agust D is so packed and powerful that, even almost 10 years later, it manages to capture so much of Suga's story. In some respects, it can be difficult to listen to, and yet the entire album is deeply important and resonant, making it a valuable, beautiful, and emotional exploration of the self. Despite coming out in 2016, I think it would be possible to learn a great deal about Suga's journey just from this album alone. But of course, this was not the end of his story by any means, and so it was perhaps inevitable that he would return to his Agust D persona to keep unpacking the tough and important issues of life. This leads us to his 2020 mixtape D2. In an interview on YouTube, Suga describes this second mixtape as being a story about his present to contrast the stories of his past he explored on Agust D. To me, this makes it clear that there is a lot of continuity between the albums and between the versions of Agust D we see represented in the music videos, which I'll discuss a bit later. In the first track, Moonlight, the lyrics even say, "A lot has changed, but the moonlight remains the same," acknowledging that his circumstances have changed, but that at his core, he is the same, and his feelings, although evolved, travel down similar paths. And indeed, we see similarities between the Agust D mixtapes right away through tracks like Descharge or What Do You Think, both of which are swaggering clapbacks against Suga's haters. Much like in his first mixtape, however, the mood shifts with the next tracks, which begin critiquing the world around him. Songs like Strange and 28 expose the contradictory nature of life and lament the way the world around us can crush our dreams, especially as we get older. These songs invite a great deal of melancholy reminiscing, specifically about Suga's life and personality, which continues in tracks like Burn It, People, and Hansul, all of which are deeply introspective. The mixtape's final two tracks, Interlude Set Me Free and Dear My Friend, also share this vibe and are full of emotion as Suga looks back on very specific circumstances of his life, wondering if different actions in the past would have altered his present. This is especially true of the latter track, which is the final track of the album, in which Suga looks back on a doomed friendship, one whose loss is still keenly felt. The song's Korean title can be translated directly as What Would It Be Like?, which not only summarizes the feelings of wondering if things could have been different, but feels like a through line of the entire mixtape, making it a perfect, if not melancholy, ending. For as much as D2 looks at the past, it never stays stuck there, and in many ways it feels like it sets up the focus of D-Day, an album exploring both present and future. In fact, discussing the future is the very first thing we hear on the album, with the song that shares the album's title declaring, "Future's gonna be okay." However, more than just speculating about the future or discussing it, D-Day seems to be an effort to erase fear of the future specifically. Per his own descriptions, Suga intended D-Day to be about bringing all of his past messages together, and in this we see how he encourages his listeners to not be bound by the past or controlled by a fear of what's yet to come. Rather, the album encourages us to break out of these things, and to especially break out of the things in life that limit our ability to think, feel, and create. This is perhaps best seen in the album's title track, Haegum. Haegum's title refers to a Korean string instrument, but the word also means to be freed from something that is acting as a barrier. This track perfectly reflects the ideas put forth in the album's first track about finally feeling free from pain and limitation, actually looking towards the future with anticipation rather than dread. But it's not free from Suga's usual messages when it discusses the idea of liberation. Rather, the song encourages listeners to think about the things that hold them back and analyze them so they can be liberated from the traps of their own making in a way that is productive. BTS, and especially Suga himself, have always discussed societal problems like prejudice, hatred, and the flaws of certain societal expectations. In Hagum, he discusses these same problems, especially looking at how modern online culture has made these problems worse and how the abundance of information has paradoxically made it harder for people to express themselves. While he cautions us to not contribute to the problem and to think before we act, the core of Hagum is the idea of being able to finally break free of the things that restrict our thinking, an attitude that fits with BTS's oft-repeated themes such as self-love and the ability to use your voice. The next tracks seem to be part of this release as well. In Huh, featuring J-Hope, Suga seems to be releasing himself from the hatred of other people, while in Amygdala, he revisits some of the worst moments of his past and attempts to process them, just as the amygdala itself is the part of the brain that processes fear and anxiety. For this song especially, Suga describes the process of writing it as a process of healing, of sorting through his own responses to past trauma and negative events which allowed him to overcome them. Following these songs comes SDL, short for the song's repeated line, "Somebody Does Love," as well as People Part 2, the latter of which was the album's pre-release track. These two tracks have connective tissue and were designed to be something of a respite from the songs that Suga describes as the album's heavy tracks. After them comes Polar Night, a song which Suga was inspired to write thanks to the keyword 30, a topic he was thinking about around the time of his 30th birthday. The term polar night refers to the phenomenon that happens in the northernmost and southernmost parts of the world, where, during the winter months, the sun doesn't rise and these regions experience darkness for months on end. But the term also puts me in mind of the word polarizing, which means to divide something into two opposite and contrasting groups, not dissimilar to the poles of the earth. This is fitting as the song itself analyzes the way people divide themselves into one side or another, and how this often breeds a lack of sympathy, similar to what he points out in the lyrics of Hagum. Polar Night's critique of this type of anger also reminds me a bit of the BTS rap line song Ugh, although this song points out that none of us may be free from this type of bias in a way that really encourages self-reflection. If we are to stop the eternal darkness of this hatred and division, we need to reflect on our own actions, which makes it even more profound that the instrumental track that immediately follows this one is called Interlude Dawn, as if to say we are finally seeing the sunrise after this endless night. What follows is the song Snooze, a heartfelt song that Suga considers of a similar style to previous tracks like So Far Away and Dear My Friend, cementing the three songs as tracks of earnest raw emotion and yearning. In Snooze, these emotions are expressed towards other artists who are now walking the same path he himself walked for years, encouraging them to be good to themselves as they try to accomplish their dreams. However, this sentiment isn't only addressed to young musicians, but to anyone who works hard to accomplish a dream, and the later lines of the song borrow almost completely from So Far Away. This time, Suga isn't talking to himself and using the idea of his dreams as a sort of mantra. Rather, he's talking to other people with a dream, hoping to give them the consolation he himself couldn't receive while achieving his own goals and encouraging them in his own way. This makes it all the more profound that the final track of the album, Life Goes On, not only reminds us to keep going, but borrows from the BTS track of the same name from the 2020 pandemic-specific album, B. Suga's song under this title is made from the beat and lyrics that he himself had suggested for the original song before the melody as we know it was chosen, and he considers this song almost like a remix of that original track. As such, its warm messages and wishes of consolation remain the same, while also capturing the melancholy nature of the passage of time, making it a perfect way to end what has become known as the Agust D Trilogy. Through these three albums, we see the way Suga and his music have grown, and it's impossible to talk about the evolution of Agust D as a character without looking at the evolution of Agust D and Suga as a musician. As NME's review of the album so perfectly says, the backbone of D-Day is the idea of liberation, and this record finds him largely moving on from those old, barbed emotions, setting himself free and stepping fully into the role of a wise social commentator and, at times, protector. When we look at the change from D1 to D2 to D-Day, we see the progression of these thoughts, and how Suga manages to layer all these emotions into all three albums. But of course, this change is most notable when we see it visually, as we do in the fascinating continuing story of his music videos. Agust D in the music videos. Not including D-Day's pre-release track People Part 2, the Agust D Trilogy features 5 main music videos: Agust D and Give It To Me in Agust D, Descharge in D2, and finally Hegum and Amygdala in D-Day. Although these songs and videos are all drastically different from each other, they all share interesting connective tissue, especially in the way Suga, as Agust D, appears in each of them. As I mentioned earlier, it not only seems like Suga has created a character for these videos, but that he's actually created multiple versions of that character. Much like there are 3 Agust D albums, I think it can be argued that there are 3 distinct versions of the character, which I believe can be identified as the blonde Agust D of the first mixtape, the version with the scar across his eye that was first introduced in Descharge, and the black-haired, non-scarred Agust D who appears as the central character in Hegum. BTS playing characters that represent their struggles is nothing new. If you're familiar with the BTS universe and its many music videos, you know that portraying characters and unique scenarios is central to many of BTS's most iconic songs and videos. Therefore, it's not a surprise to see Suga portray so many versions of Agust D. But I do find it fascinating to track the way these characters develop and how this fact represents the messages behind the songs and albums, especially when you consider how they cross over. To get an idea of the development of the character, we need to start with his appearances in the mixtape of the same name, in which the blonde Agust D appears for the first time. The music videos for the songs Agust D and Give It To Me tell a 2-part overlapping story, which begins in the former video, where Suga is depicted as escaping from being tied up in a container house, to the latter video where we see the overturned container set ablaze, ostensibly because of his actions. Although neither of these videos is nearly as story-driven as Suga's later music videos, I think they still perfectly embody the vibes of the songs and of the mixtape. To me, a great deal of the first Agust D album is a look at Suga's relentless hard work in his effort to become the best, reflecting on how this propelled him to his current status, but also how terrifying that current status can be. The first 2 tracks are filled with confidence and swagger, as well as the desire to climb even higher and burn even brighter, which is reflected in these music videos. In Suga's own words, this Agust D became a king, something which carries into D2. In that mixtape's title song Descharge, we see more of a storyline and are introduced to this king version of Agust D, whose domain is a kingdom that evokes the Silla era of Korean history. Sporting traditional garments, modern footwear, and a very obvious facial scar, the king is shown terrorizing his advisors, handing down deadly sentences to anyone who displeases him, and wielding his sword with ruthless precision. Most notably, however, this king is blonde, further highlighting that the character from the first mixtape has become a monster, much as the later tracks seem to fear. The question then becomes if anyone can possibly tame the beast that has taken over, and Descharge gives us our answer in the form of a second Agust D identity. Much like the king, this version likewise has a scar, albeit his hair is jet black, and we see him in modern clothing and with modern items like the car that is driven into the king's compound. The storyline of the video shows how this version of Agust D becomes the Kingslayer at the heart of a plan to overthrow the tyrant, wherein the man who should execute him for displeasing the king enables him to be in the perfect place to dispatch the tyrant instead. In the shooting sketch for this video, it is described that Suga has become a new version of Agust D in order to confront the previous version. In some ways, I think that the entire video could be viewed as a depiction of one possible path, a darker version of what Suga's success might have come to mean. In addition to his obvious cruelty, we even see a physical depiction of this in the king's facial scar. While Suga himself has said that the scar was chosen mainly for the purposes of shock and contrast, I think it can also be seen as a callback to the song Tony Montana from the first mixtape, and the fact that it heavily references the plots and characters from the film Scarface. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the scarred Tyrant King version of Agust D is almost exactly what Suga feared he might become if he continued to feed the monster that is fame and success. Just like the king in Dechwatha tramples on his court officials and shows very little interest in anything aside from his own skill and power, the demands of fame could be seen as doing likewise. But while the king could be seen as a sort of worst-case scenario, the other Agust D shows what actually happened instead. Suga had the power to rise up and overcome the monster that he might have otherwise become. When you consider that the first mixtape represents the past and this mixtape represents something closer to the present, this metaphor becomes even more interesting, as if the present is overcoming the past, something which is perhaps visually shown by the mashup of the historical and modern elements. And yet, the similarities between King and Kingslayer open up the possibility that this battle is ongoing, and that true victory might be deeper than simply killing those angry thoughts or dark temptations. Suga himself mentioned that the blonde Agust D could be seen as anger, and implies that the scarred Agust D might have another representation too, one which makes me think that they are like mirrors to one another. Beyond just the shared facial scar, I also can't help but notice that even Kingslayer Agust D is dressed similarly to how the original blonde Agust D was in the music videos from the first mixtape, making this battle seem almost cyclical. To that end, despite the fact that the scar in Dechwatha was more there for aesthetic purposes, it comes back in profound and significant ways in the music videos for the album D-Day, starting with the album's title track, Hagum. Here, we see that the Kingslayer of Dechwatha has become a sort of king himself, tied to money, power, status, etc. He is portrayed as a respected and feared detective who almost seems more like a mafioso, and we know it's him because of the scar, now healed. This video also introduces us to a new Agust D, one who shares the dark hair of the Kingslayer, but this time has an unmarked face. This new Agust D is a gangster of sorts, and the video opens with the bloody robbery of a large sum of money which seems to belong to the other Agust D, setting him and the Kingslayer up as adversaries. In their rivalry, we can ask a number of interesting questions, particularly about what this clash represents. Although he has not become a king like that of the blonde Agust D in Dechwatha, the former Kingslayer seems to be corrupt now, which raises the question of how he got that way. Money, power, and status have long since been things that Suga has feared, and it's interesting to see the Kingslayer seemingly be lost to them. We can also ask the question of what the new Agust D represents. Although this new version of the character is a gangster, he also seems even wiser, even more mature, and even more willing to confront the things that bring him pain or sorrow than the previous iterations. There's still anger, there's still fear, but they are managed now. No more kings, no more bosses, just an Agust D ready to be real, raw, and vulnerable. The idea of the scar comes back around once more in the video for Amygdala, where the image becomes even more profound and also deeply sad. In this video, we see an unscarred Agust D give himself the facial scar, a reflection of Suga's own belief that our wounds and scars come from ourselves. Because this song represents the struggle through pain, fear, and anxiety, it seems to act as the origin story for the scarred Kingslayer we first see in D2. That was an Agust D who gave into the pain and fear of the past, and it gives hope that the Agust D of D-Day is finding a way to sublimate those things and move past them. This also relates back to Hagum and how we see a liberated version of Agust D, giving us hope that maybe this version of the character does in fact represent renewal and a freedom from that which would otherwise hold him back. I believe that represents hope for all of us as well, as perhaps we too can be liberated from the things that hold us back and choose which version of ourselves we wish to become. Even before the first Agust D album was ever released, the idea of Agust D as an alter ego was teased in the BTS rap line song Cypher Part 3. From that moment onward, the identity of Agust D was seen as Suga's way of discussing emotions he couldn't so easily embody as Suga of BTS. But Agust D means so much more than that, and the messages in the albums bearing his name run deep, as I believe the storyline of the music videos shows us. By portraying one alter ego as 3 different characters, I believe Suga was better able to express every facet and emotion of his story, eventually uniting all of them back into the one concept and identity that is at the core of Agust D. More than just songs about anger or frustration, this body of work is a complex, emotional, unflinching look at Suga's hardships, his life philosophy, and the way he matured emotionally from a place of needing to prove himself to a place of acceptance and healing. Whether as Suga or as Agust D, the music of the rapper Min Yoongi is powerful, and its value extends beyond just his own journey. By allowing us to take this journey with him, Suga allows us all to explore our own emotions with just as much freedom and raw vulnerability. In a world that expects we should be perfect or should conform to the opinions of others, Suga's Agust D music and his own philosophies remind us to be ourselves, wholly and unapologetically, in a way that is deeply valuable. Whatever he chooses to do or say in future, by allowing us into Agust D's world, he has left a lasting mark that I know many people, myself included, will always respect and admire. Welcome home, Min Yoongi. We've missed you. Now, I'd love to hear what you think. How do you view the characters of the Agust D Trilogy and their stories? What do you believe these different characters say not only about Suga and his musical philosophy, but about the messages he often portrays in his music? Do you have any other takeaways? And what does Suga's music mean to you? As always, I look forward to hearing all your thoughts and theories about the impactful words of Suga and his iconic alter ego. Until next time.